Welcome to Hollers and Hills, the podcast that takes you deep into the heart of East Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains. The tourism hub welcomes millions of visitors a year, but it's also home to generations rooted in its Hollers and Hills. Join us as we uncover centuries-old rural communities, share rich history, and explore landmarks and attractions old and new. Meet the passionate craftsmen, entrepreneurs, and community leaders dedicated to preserving this beautiful region for future generations. Get ready to pack your bags and create your own mountain memories. Hollers and Hills is sponsored by Compass Ventures, a leading developer in Sevier County, helping to navigate your next trip to the Smokies. The Apple Barn is a tasty tradition and beloved destination in Sevierville. The family business grew from a simple hobby and a carport stand. 5 decades later, it's home to an apple orchard of 7,000 trees strong, Sevierville's oldest restaurant, shops, a cider bar, and even a winery. The Apple Barn is an entire farm-to-table operation. In this episode, we talk to the man behind the apples and his son, who's helping continue the business of mixing mountain flavor with family fun. Hello and welcome to Hollers and Hills. I'm Beth Haynes alongside Austin Williams, and boy, you are in for a treat today. We have 2 special guests with us today, Mr. Bill Kilpatrick and his son Kent, and they are the family behind the beloved Apple Barn in Sevierville, Tennessee. And obviously, I'm a little envious of you, Austin. You grew up, very close to the Apple Barn. As a kid, we would travel up to Sevierville, and every stop, it seems, in Sevier County included the Apple Barn. So certainly a destination for us and a special treat for us. But your families have overlapped over the years.
That's the case. Many years, and even up to coaching little ones in soccer here just a few months ago.
That's right.
I hear you're a soccer coach.
That's correct.
Wear many hats, right?
That's right.
Well, we're thrilled to have you both with us, and we want to talk certainly the success of the Apple Barn today, and really is a major landmark in this community and in the Great Smoky Mountains. People have been coming here for 5 decades just to visit with your family and see the farm. But I want to know how it all started, and I think to get to that story, we first have to talk about the farm, which, Mr. Kilpatrick, dates back to the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Mullendore family owned it for, I'm not sure how many years, but the 2 brothers and sister that lived there in the house, they grew tobacco and had some corn on the place, but the upper part, the hills and so forth, was all fenced, and they had cattle they raised and was out there in the Apple Barn. And whenever we moved up there, we just assumed we would move all that out and remodel the house and just live there. And the boys wanted ponies, of course, to be put in the barn. So we invested in a few ponies.
And you were a pharmacist.
Yes, I was a pharmacist.
So how did you get connected with a generational farm?
Well, I had the drugstore here in Sevierville. I bought it in January 1, 1964 from Tom Williams. And he and Jack Stewart had the only 2 drugstores in town.
Pharmacy, how long were you there?
Well, the pharmacy, I kept it till 10 years or so, I guess, whenever I sold it to Rob DeLozier,
Yeah.
and operated it all that time. But it increased and grew quite a bit.
Did you know anything about farming? And how did you go from a pharmacist to a farm?
Well,
you bought it with another
on
gentleman.
my dad's side, his brother and that side of the family had a farm in Tellico Plains. And I'd go over there in the summer when I was in school and stay with them. And they had mules and plowed and did all that stuff, and I got to where I liked all that. So I learned a lot from them when I was growing up. But I didn't have any intention of farming. After my dad sent me to pharmacy school and I got out, I just expected to do that the rest of my days. But whenever the way it worked out, after I sold it and moved up there, Well, I thought, you know, I don't want to go to the hospital. I go in that pharmacy and work all day, fill prescriptions and doodle out medicine for the folks in the hospital. I didn't see daylight. I couldn't tell if it was raining or snowing or what it was doing. I said, I want to get out where I can see stuff and do things. And so that's when I made up my mind I was going to do something different. I didn't know what it was. But when we finally got the orchard going in the first year we had apples, we sold them in our carport there right off of Lonesome Valley Road then. It wasn't Apple Valley. Once we really got going with the orchard, and was it about 1982?
81 was
81.
the official grand opening. 76 would have been that big planting. And
the World's Fair was in Knoxville in 82. We had people from everywhere. And the lady wrote the articles in the paper in the Sentinel. She wrote a story about that. And that Sunday we was absolutely covered up. There was cars everywhere. And I thought, man, we're in a mess now. We got people and couldn't.
Because you all had only been open not even a year, maybe, as the Apple Barn officially?
Yeah, we hadn't been there long, about a year or a year and a half.
What are your earliest memories, Kent?
it was just an amazing place to grow up, and we can look back now. My brother, he's 5 years older than myself, and to think about the things you would take for granted as two little boys growing up on the Little Pigeon River, it was truly out in the country, and to explain that to people now, how everything has grown to us, and we're just kind of the center of action in the tourism area. I remember in of course, when the first trees were planted, we were so little, I was just born. It's quite the place to grow up, and we would jump in the holes as we planted more trees, and we would love, picking the apples and having a place to have a cow or having a horse or having those kind of things. And if you fast forward to after the grand opening, and I remember WSEV was the radio station, had the Jeep with the cowboy hat on top, and so whoever the disc jockey at the time was pulled it up in the Jeep, and the high school band came, and Lamar Alexander came to cut the ribbon, and we had I would call it a float, but it was just a flatbed trailer out there, and we had bushels of apples that we had picked, and so we had this little kind of festival atmosphere for the grand opening. But when we sold all those apples, then we just locked the door. There was no year-round business, and so when as far as growing up on the river and being there, it was in the mid-'80s. It was so out in the country, and we had all of our cousins and all of the friends and the Wade boy that was all come over, and the neighbors, and we would play football, baseball, basketball, whatever the sport of the season. We would just have this grand big yard that we would play in. And then as we grew a little bit, it was kind of the idea. Dad had a 5-gallon hand press, and so the Apple Barn and Cider Mill Inc. was the original trade name of the business. It was just fresh apples. Mom would make a few pies. Dad had enough cider for the neighbors, basically, that would come by. And so that was just so small and so easy and so convenient. When we would finish with that harvest that year, Dad would go back to the drugstore at the hospital. I remember when we were little, we'd go to what's now LeConte Hospital, was the place he worked before it was even built there. So we'd go visit Dad and then come back home to the farm. And then in 1986, the idea of Dad kept a guest register, and one of the most common comments in the early stages was in the apple cider, we sold it by the jug, and so people would open that jug and pour it in a cup. Well, Mom would run to the house and get some kind of Solo cup or anything that she could find and let them sit on the riverbank. And so we opened the cider bar and we started doing fried apple pies. But fast forward to '86, a full-service restaurant was discussed, and we knew really not anything about the full-service restaurant operation. So Dad partnered with a local gentleman, and the idea of the restaurant came along. Well, that to two young boys, we had to move out of the house. That we grew up in the Applewood Farmhouse restaurant was our home, where we came home from the hospital, and we thought, oh no, we're going to miss out on growing up on this riverbank and this farm. And in hindsight, now I'm 45, Kevin is 50. Our kids are starting to be a little more grown and involved a little bit, and to see that farm grow into what it is now is a agricultural tourism destination that people can come, and it's fascinating to say that it's the first time they've seen a tractor. It's the first time they've seen an apple grow. The first time they've seen cider made. And so I think there's so much value in that we grew up there and we love that agriculture, that family experience, but we didn't just split it up, subdivide it, and sell it off and change things. And now when we were out in the country, now everything is built up around us. And so to be able to preserve that feeling, it's a little bit of an oasis in the middle of the tourist float. People can come and they want to put a blanket out and then just see the grass and just walk around and walk their dog and have a little bit of a place to come and hang out. So it's kind of transitioned from that when we grew up on a farm to be able to have our kids grow up there now and to have that same kind of atmosphere is fun.
And you're still producing apples 5 decades later, and you were told that you couldn't grow apples in Sevierville
right.
County.
Yeah, Shorty Hounsel said you can't grow apples here. But the other thing is that's unusual, that you couldn't see any of that. The riverbank and all the highway was grown up with trees all up through there. And you could drive by there and you didn't know there was a barn down there on Lonesome Valley Road. You couldn't see it. So as things progressed along and we started planting the trees up on the hill, and then when we got around to open the barn, then we started thinning out along the riverbank, taking trees out so you could see, look over there and see it. But for a long, long time, nobody knew the place was there. Just drive right on by.
The cattle barn is still the centerpiece of the apple barn. And let's talk about the footprint, because boy, you have grown from just a carport of apples to multiple shops, a creamery, a winery, 2 restaurants.
It just happened in stages. Whenever we were first starting, we struggled to have enough money to get the barn cleaned up and fixed and painted. And then when we started doing pies in the cider bar, we did them in the back there for a while. But then we had a lady, Pat and Horace Kent, that lived up in Jones Cove. Horace's mother, she was a good cook and she made pies and things like that. So we talked to her, and they come down, and she'd come down there and sit in a chair and peel apples and put them in a container, and then go back and cook them and make the fried pies. Well, as that grew, she talked Pat into doing it, working in it full time. So we built a little pie kitchen right there at the corner, and because of the insurance and the way that barn was built, the insurance company just didn't like you having any kind of cooking or fire in the back. So we had to space it so many feet away from the barn and put it back there. But we put windows in it so people could stand there and see them cooking the pies, putting them in the oven and then the deep fryer and all that stuff. And so it just gradually grew, but it got to where they'd come in earlier and earlier of a morning to start making the pies, because we could sell everything they could make on Saturdays and Sundays. So it was sort of a busy wipe-out time. And then we started, Lawrence Manning lived up at Caton's Chapel, had a little orchard, and he started bringing his apples to us. And then the Carvers and the folks at Cosby, they started wanting to bring apples down, so we got apples from them. And then later on, we moved down into North Georgia to the Messier family. They've had good apples. And Kent's got connections over at Hendersonville, and we've got 3 or 4 growers growing apples for us over there.
Because it takes a lot of apples now.
So it takes a lot of apples.
When you grow up, kind of being the kid, seeing that what the process he's discussing there is really kind of cool. That you've got little old Miss Kent when she was peeling apples and starting the process. We were really happy to sell a tray a day, and Dad, from that day to now, has always said we'll never sell a day old fried apple pie. We don't put preservatives. We don't, and the process hasn't changed any. So, not to get too detailed, I think a tray's like 30, 32 pies. So it was a big deal to sell a whole tray of pies in a day. And now the goal would be like 7,000 pies in a day. We've never hit that number quite, but we've been right there at it. And so it's still to do it the same process. We do start earlier in the morning, but it all is hand rolled on the same table. There's only 4 positions on that table. So when people come, the historical relevance of Dad talking about that building where we put the first apples that came in, it's the same building. It was that wormy chestnut and black walnut that was grown. Those trees were grown on that farm. That's why you couldn't see the barn. It was a portable sawmill, and those cattle would come into a bulk hay feeder situation, and so the hay would be kicked out from the top, the barn loft, which was really fun when you're a little boy, but Mom's like, don't fall in that hay feeder, the cattle are going to eat you. And so those are great memories, but to be able to translate that in that slow growth was so conservative and so cautious, because it had to be. We didn't have this big extravagant budget to go and say, hey, we're going to build this apple barn complex. It was 100% from that guest register and people saying, hey, we want a full mill, we want this. And it's that guest register is in the same spot today, and this man right here still flips through it and reads it to see if there's any, body that's had a good experience, a bad experience, and there's other ways we keep up with in touch with our customer base now, obviously, but we still utilize that. And it was also a very natural progression. We would hope to also sell a tray of candy apples, and that came from a little old guy in Gatlinburg that was hand dipping it. And a lot of people don't relate really special candies to the apple barn. They think of fresh apple cider and the apple pies and the restaurant, but we have a really special candy shop. We have all these little things that is very local driven, and our connection to the University of Tennessee and the original first rootstock that was planted. I'm a graduate of the UT Institute of Agriculture. I had an ag economics major, but I did focus a lot on rootstocks and plantings and things that we could shift our orchard into a much more efficient, that where we have that 7 is growing to 10,000 quite quickly. I've got 3 more thousand rootstocks on order that we can plant now at every 4-foot spacing. There's irrigation. The way we farm now is much different than the old. 4,000 trees could produce a lot, but not near what we can produce now. And so the connection back to UT on those original rootstocks in 1976, when Dr. Lockwood came and visited our orchard, and Dad was telling that story earlier, it's so cool to me that he is my #1 contact now. He's who at University of Tennessee I still talk to. And Dad wouldn't mind me sharing, Dad just he's 89 and I'm 45, and we have the same extension gentleman at University of Tennessee. And so between the visit with Keith Carver and Dr. Lockwood and those gentlemen that make sure I'm doing the right thing with my herbicide, pesticide, fungicide, all my applications, we're doing a really cool research project that it helps local growers in a way that they couldn't afford. The efficiency of small orchard growers in East Tennessee now is a thing, but it's still very small. There's other families that are in our geographic region that come to us and want to know our spray data, and that could get quite boring conversation quickly. But it is amazing the things that we're learning and able to share with other small growers in our area.
And you might tell them that Dr. Lockwood grew up in an orchard family in New York State.
Oh,
His
wow.
mom and dad had an orchard, and he grew up growing apples up there. So he knew. And
How many apples from day one, that first year, did y'all go through and sell to today?
That's a very difficult question.
A lot.
A lot.
yeah, we didn't have very many, but we get apples now. We get 48 to 20 bushel bins on a flatbed tractor trailer, and we get some weeks 2 or 3 loads of those. We got coolers to put them in, but we're grinding them up and using them in the fall, pretty quick. It takes a lot of apples.
Some of the equations of the fruit that we're growing and bringing in from other farms, our cider operation is a good, it shows kind of what we're doing with fresh apples now, and we're kind of one of the pioneers, we're the only ones, but we're doing fresh apple cider and hard apple cider and the apple winery, and with all of that, that's about 100,000 gallons we produce in a year of cider, and it has its own life after that, whether it's a sparkling cider that is pasteurized or it's just the fresh good old cider. And that it's amazing that kids will come in and you pour them a glass of cider to taste, and they've either never had it, never heard of it, not a juice that's a highly pasteurized or highly filtered pasteurized product. It's the old-fashioned ciders, and so it's kind of, we've also backed into the agricultural piece. Is people really appreciate and want to know where their stuff comes from now, whether they're going to a specialized market or grocery store. It's become cool again to grow your own things and to have your own production. And so in my days at UT, the agricultural economics and that whole notion of value-added agriculture, we were kind of already doing all of that. So to be able to have some of my original professors and advisors that worked with these different programs, it's how you not only pick that apple, but when you put it in the apple butter, it lasts longer, you have more value, it has an experience to the customer. So when we're already making 100,000 gallons of cider. Now this year, it's 2024, we're going to break ground, or not break ground, we're going to cut the ribbon just in a few days of our new hard cider facility that's going to produce all this in that experience where you walk in and you see that fresh apple come out of the cooler, go straight to the belt press, squeezed into juice, and then take on its life. It'll either go into the bottling line, and then you can walk in there and have a taste, take it home with you, or it'll go in a fermentation tank for hard cider, or it'll get its next thing. So it's really important for us. Our thing is see, smell, taste the fruits of our labor. So people come in the candy shop. Dad came up with this great idea that we have to have hoods over, and so everything's cooked in these large copper kettles that you would imagine seeing at Dollywood or somewhere and putting on the show. And so you have a big wooden paddle and you're stirring whatever's in it. And in that hood, it's ducted straight outside into the sidewalk area. And you walk by and it just, you get that smell of fresh baked bread, the fresh made apple cider, the fresh fried apple pies, the apple butter. So the idea is when you're there, everybody calls it, what time's the tour? Just come on. You know, we're always in production and want to show them what we're doing.
When you were in college and you all were, getting going, did you all both have that vision of what it is today? Did you expect it to be something slightly different?
Its dad had an innate, just crazy quality of being able to have that creative and figure out, and it's up to us to preserve that and figure out how to grow. It's so many people will come to you. If you just own the real estate is an attractive piece, that people have these grand ideas, and you have to stay so grounded and so directed and so okay with not just getting rich overnight and trying to make sure that you preserve that idea of apple is king. We want to keep apple as the most prevalent thing instead of, well, there's more return in a tourism driven different side of it, so that people do drive back in there. And that's to me, and I think Dad was alluding to the fact that we have so many partner growers. It is very expensive to grow an apple at that scale. We're a very small grower in the big scheme of things for how much fruit we use. And so many people come to me and say, well, why don't you just buy your fruit instead of going to all this trouble of growing the apple? And that's the greatest thing to me, is that we grow the apple, that you come there and you can, we've got a little section we're trying to grow for pick your own, and people can come and walk through the orchard or sit on a blanket and see that experience. So the vision that I want to protect and see is when you have, there's so many people that say, well, my grandfather or my grandmother or my mother, my father brought me here when I was young. It's so important to preserve it enough that the next generation can see that. So we grow every year, but it has to be in a way that grows, that is complementary to the roots and the establishment that is there. And so that every year there will be a capital investment. Most years you'll never know what it was. Last year, irrigation for my new rootstocks. This year it's a massive new wonderful facility for our ciders. So it'll be very evident that there's a new feather in our hat when people come to visit, and that's exciting to me. When the guys from UT or somebody that we can come and talk to you all and say, hey, there is something worth coming to see, but you'll recognize everything still. It's not, we're not changing that much.
That's all familiar. I love numbers. You talk about the production throughout the year, but break it down by like apple butter, apple pies. Throw some numbers at us, the production year each and every year, and then the amount of visitors that come through the doors.
Well, if we start at the visitorship, that is something that is very unique, because we're driven like everybody else in our tourism community of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. For so many years, I kept quoting the number. It was 10 million visitors a year. Obviously, we've exceeded that at the national park. I don't know what the current numbers. Austin probably knows it's 13, 14 million is our latest.
Somewhere in there, you hear
it's
varying numbers. But.
And so we have always tracked our numbers through the seats in the restaurant, how many turns we would get, and it's a long story short, it's over 1 million visitors a year that come to the Apple Barn, and it's so simple how we operate our business. We're not tracking the exact numbers of everything. So when we get into the production side of things, when you get into the third weekend in October, it's a time that if you love crowds and you love excitement and you love seeing the apples picked, that's the time to come. And if you don't love that, don't come see us, because there are people parked on the riverbank and we're at full max capacity on those times and the longest waits. But you're in the fried apple pies, I think I got to that 5,000-6,000 mark is a very common number for daily production. And as far as the kettles of apple butter, we cook in the steam kettles are how big?
40 gallons.
40 gallons. So we cook at least 4 steam kettles 3 times a day. So it's there's almost no way to keep up with our apple butter production.
Yeah.
I would have to do some homework before I knew how many gallons per year we go through apple butter, but it's our leading seller.
And it's one thing that I think we need to tell them, that we've had nice cooperation from these other states. When we first started in this, I belonged to the Tennessee Fruit Growers Association and everything, and we'd have meetings, and we started going to Ohio, because Ohio State had a big apple production. We went, to Nova Scotia and different areas where they're growing apples, and the folks were very helpful. I mean, telling you how to do it and let you see the way they did their process, and that's where we learned a lot of that, what they're doing, because it's a big deal in Michigan, Virginia, and there's another state up there, I can't remember where it is right now, but of course a lot in Washington State. Mm-hmm. And I've gone to a lot of those places in Washington where they grow just miles and miles of apples. But the folks are very congenial and helpful.
So helpful, because they will tune in rootstocks to be the most effective yield per acre. But it's also so valuable to have our grower cooperative, like that's talking about, the University of Tennessee, NC State, University of Georgia, all these growers. There's so few of us in the Southeast that if you try to take a Washington State, a New York State, where it's apple country, and grow that rootstock in Tennessee, your chill requirement, everything is so different. If we try to do that, it's not effective. And so the Dr. Lockwoods of the world, they translate that to our climate zone and to what we're doing. Honeycrisp is a crowd favorite. It has baffled me that it's amazing that apple is the only apple that gets more, it's more expensive per pound than any apple that's ever been in the history. And so everybody's like, well, we got to plant Honeycrisp. Well, there's right now in the Southeast tons of Honeycrisp that are getting pushed up because that's not a good grower. It was developed at the University of Minnesota, and it works great in that chill requirement, but there's so much difference to when you get into the Southeastern climate zone. It's too hot. Mm-hmm. They don't look like a Honeycrisp. They taste okay, but they go all into cider. There's nothing fit to go on a store shelf. But it's important to develop these relationships, and I think that one of the really interesting things about Dad always believed in, if you do something, do it well. We do it here. We do it behind glass where everybody can see it. And if you do not, partner with these folks. And so Alan Benton became a close friend when Dad and Alan were in the same little area there. From Dad was in Vaughn, and then Alan was in Madisonville, and in those areas they got to share stories. And so when the Apple Barn came about, Alan said, hey, we'll bring you some green hams, and you cut that, we prune our apple trees, and he loves a blend of hickory, mesquite, and applewood. And so he helped come up with that initial smoking blend, and we've got the smokehouse still there on property. And he would bring the green hams and coach us along, and Dad knew a lot about that as well. And so we would have our Applewood Farm brand, and we still sell it today, of country bacon that's smoked in our blend of the apple trees that we clip there. And the obvious draw of Alan Benton and his notoriety and what he knows in that world is married together. And so when we pick these people, we have molasses, we have ham and bacon and cheese from Sweetwater Valley, and we have certain growers that we're just proud to showcase their product. So when you go through the Pick Tennessee product program, we're always a big supporter of that, and we'll bring in things that it's important that when people come visit East Tennessee, they want to take a part of East Tennessee home with them, and they don't want to go back with just a souvenir type thing that they can get anywhere else. So we try to showcase those local family crafts and things that if you go on our property, everything that is there is either made there or tied to East Tennessee. Other than Orvis, Orvis is something we're really proud of to be on our farm. But,
Well, you mentioned family, still a family business, second generation. Will there be a third generation?
absolutely, absolutely. I have 3 girls, and my brother has a little girl, so we love to have them come up and help, and they jump right in there.
They started asking, Madison did 2 or 3 years ago, when can I come to work at the apple barn? She wants to be old enough to come and work.
And we put them to work. We'll let them get back there and help us out. So yes, that's definitely the hope. And everybody says, well, did your dad say you're going to work at the apple barn? And never one time did Dad. It was always interest, and I was always interested in agricultural and the idea, but I never just said for sure I'm going to work at the apple barn. And my brother was a finance major at UT, and so Dad always joked that he's got Kent, that I was the tractor driver, and Kevin was the computer minded, and it really works quite well, even though it is kind of funny that I'll come up with a creative idea or something I want to see or do, and Kevin tells me why it will not work.
It's been a tremendous success. Mr. Kilpatrick, do you ever just pull up to the farm and look at the work and the success? I mean, all of that grew from 4 simple trees.
Right, 4 simple
hobby.
apple trees.
Did you ever think that it would be what it is today?
I tell everybody it's a hobby that got out of hand.
We're sure glad it did.
Yep, when we started planting all those other trees, and everybody kept saying, why in the world do you want to plant those trees on that hill? They won't grow up there. But we fooled them.
He knows exactly what's coming and going from the apple barn at all times, especially his 2 boys. If we're late to work, or if one of his Christmas presents that Kevin and I bought together was like a sight glass, and we wish we could take that present back, because he can tell you the exact details of what's going on at work.
Can you give us a glimpse of what you're eyeing the next decade and what you think will be the apple barn 10 years from now?
We want to be very cautious of overdeveloping. We want to keep that natural scape that we've got going. And we also, as I said, we're listening to the customer. And one thing that seems to be a natural, people want to come and spend more time, so they want to stay over. And I think that would be something that would be a consideration. But it's just something that we don't want to get out of our lane. We want to keep apples important, and that could be. It may never happen, but that's something that that people indicate to us they would like to come stay with us, and we just never have stepped that far out into the discussion. And
a lot of them have asked, have you ever thought about building cabins out here? We'd like to come out here and stay. We can stay here, see the river, and see the mountains. So I'm sure they would do that, but there's so many motel rooms being built more and more all the time, and we know nothing about the lodging business.
Never stopped you before. Well, we appreciate you sharing the history and taking a walk down memory lane with us, but it really is a fixture of Sevier County. This episode was shot and edited by Link Hudson. Hollers and Hills is recorded at the Pines in downtown Sevierville. We have more stories and videos on our Hollers and Hills website. Share your Smoky Mountain memory when you log on. And don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.